Hey everybody, welcome to another fun tutorial on CreativeCow.net. My name is Grant Swanson, and here's what we're going to be doing today. Okay, so basically we have our title down here, passes through this tunnel and ends up in here, and somewhere in the transition, the title transitioned from Creative Cow Presents our new title. So that's the gist of it. Let's just get started. The first thing we want to do is create a new composition. So go to Composition, New Composition. I'm going to use the 1080 24p preset, and you know what, actually I'm going to make it 720p just to make the tutorial go a little bit faster, and hit OK. And then create another new composition, and this one's going to be a custom size. We'll make this 1500 by 1500 and hit OK. And once we're in here, you can create a new solid layer, make it comp size, and just like a dark orange brown color, I guess whatever you want, but this is the color I picked earlier, so I'm going to use that, and I'll choose OK. And then I'm going to take this image that comes off of Andrew Kramer's Action Essentials collection, and if you don't have that, that's okay, but it looks cooler with it. You don't technically have to use it for this tutorial. I'm going to scale it down to around 10 or so percent and change its transfer mode to multiply. And then we'll come back to our first composition, and actually let's name these compositions in the project panel. So we'll call, this is our main comp, we'll call it rabbit hole, and then comp 2, we'll call this wall. So we'll take the wall composition and drag it down into the rabbit hole. And let's zoom in. And with the pen tool selected, let's just come in to this burn mark and actually create a hole inside of it. Like that, and then hit F, set it to subtract, then feather it out just a little bit, and if you hit M 3 times, let's shrink the mask in just a little bit so it's not covering up the edges. And now we have an actual hole in our composition. So with that selected, let's toggle the 3D switch to make it a 3D layer, and let's duplicate the layer, and let's rename these. So this is wall 1, and then this will be wall 2. Let's change our view from the active camera to top so we can see what we're doing. And with wall 2 selected, hit P so you can see its position. And let's just move it out in 3D space to right around 600 pixels or so. And that should be good. And now let's drag I have this another texture layer also off of Action Essentials, and we'll make this a 3D layer. Hit P so we can see it, and I'm going to move this out even farther in Z space, probably around 1650, somewhere right around there. Doesn't matter exactly. You know what, I'll just make it 1650 because that's what I used earlier. Okay, so now we have 3 layers there, and I'm going to go back to our active camera to see what we have. So you can see it through the hole, and you can see the texture layer in the background. So at this point, what we want to do is create a new camera. So come up to Layer and choose New Camera. Now in After Effects, there are basically 2 kinds of cameras you can use. A 2-node camera or a 1-node camera. And for this tutorial, I'm just going to use a 1-node camera because I'm used to working with real cameras, and that's how real cameras work. The main difference is that with the 2-node camera, there's an extra point out here that you have to go out and animate, which is the point the camera is actually looking at. And in real life, you don't have to go out to some imaginary point and position where the camera is looking at. You just point the actual camera. And because this tutorial is not all that complex, we don't need to do that. So I'm just going to make it easier and use a 1-node camera. And then I'm going to use the 35mm preset just because I like the way it looks more than the 50mm preset. And hit OK. And at this point, what we're going to do is come to the very last frame, hit P for the position of the camera, and set a keyframe. And let's actually push it in using the track tool. I'm going to push it in to right around 800 pixels. Right on there looks good. And I'm going to come to the beginning And we're going to push through these holes. And this one, I'm going to have this final position be around 930 pixels. Something like that. So now if we just do a quick scrub through, you can see that we go through these holes. And what you might want to do for this first hole is just hit it and hit R. And for the Z orientation, just rotate it a little bit so it's not the same as the second hole. So we go through this hole, we go through this hole, and there you go. So now, close that up with the camera selected, hit R, actually Shift P so we can see both keyframes. So hit R, and a little bit before 1 second, I'm going to hit a keyframe for the Z rotation, and we'll set it to 1. And then right around a second before the end of the animation, let's change that back to 0. So that just makes it a little bit more interesting. We rotate the camera 1 full revolution as we go through the rabbit hole. Okay, so let's select all these keyframes and ease them in. Just hit Easy Ease or hit F9 on your keyboard and do the same thing with the rotation keyframes. That makes the animation a little bit smoother, but if I hit play, it is still kind of abrupt. So what I'm actually going to do with position selected is open the graph editor for position, and I'm going to just take these handles and pull them out a little bit, actually quite a bit. And that way the motion will smooth in to the moving much more quickly. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. And now you notice there's a big lump right in the middle, but that's fine because the middle chamber is the most boring part, and that's what we want to move through the most quickly, and it ends up looking pretty nice. So if we do this, we can see that the actual position of the camera moves much more smoothly into and out of it, and we have a second to view the titles at the beginning and at the end while the camera is still moving to add interest, but it's not moving all that much. And now we can do the same thing with the rotation. This one's a little bit different. You want to hold shift when you move these handles so you don't actually change the angle of rotation. But we're going to do the same thing basically, just smooth out the rotation on both ends so it's not so abrupt. And it's going to again move more quickly in the middle, and if you don't want that, you can actually push this keyframe a little bit out like that. So now it's going to start rotating a little bit earlier, but the rotation is going to be much more smooth into and out of it. So just hit play, you can see the rotation is a little bit nicer. Okay, so let's close the graph editor, and you can adjust that some more, but for now, I think that should be good. So now what I'm going to do is add a little bit of color correction to these different chambers. So again, let's layer this one background and apply effect, color correction, levels, and I want to make it darker. So I'm going to lower the white point, crush some of the blacks, and then lower the gamma quite a bit. And then we'll come into the blue channel. And just kind of play with it till you get something that looks blue. Maybe take out a little bit of red. Make the darks a little bit darker. And then we'll desaturate a little bit. So color correction, hue, and saturation. And just, not extreme, but just a little bit. And now with the inside of the second chamber, I just want this one to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to apply effect, color correction, curves, and just adjust it a little bit to just so it's darker. I like right around there looks good. So we come from this cool blue chamber, kind of a hot, dark chamber, and then this final chamber. So to make this more interesting, I'm actually going to drag our texture layer back out here. We will make it 3D and parent its position to the first wall. Now, as we go through, we can see that it's on top of the wall. Now, and we're going to adjust that in a second. So here we are at the end. And I'm going to change the transfer mode of this, but first I'm going to color correct it a little bit. So with levels, we're just going to crush the whites in. Do the same thing with the blacks, not the whites so much. And then just bring the overall gamma down and change the transfer mode of this to multiply. And also, before we do that, let's apply a tint to it just so none of its color goes through. And then I'm going to, with the pen tool, just create a mask around the bottom portion of the frame. So we have kind of a half vignette on it. And hit F, feather it out a bit, hit M 3 times, and let's just shrink it down just a little bit, and then hit T to reveal the opacity, and 75%, something like that. That looks nice. And one thing I might want to do is actually change the color of this, so maybe make it a little bit darker. So color correction curves, not as dark as the middle chamber, but just a little bit darker. So then as we go through, notice the texture stays with the outermost wall. Also, one thing you want to do is hit P and just change the Z position to 1 pixel, because otherwise, -1 pixels, because otherwise what can happen is that there'll be a render error and the image might start flashing on and off, because technically the texture and the first wall occupy the same space in Z space, and so what can happen, even though texture is technically on top of the first wall, it can begin to flash on and off. So just to be safe, we'll move it so it is technically in front of the wall by 1 pixel. And then it'll still stay and track with the first wall because it's parented to it. Okay, now that we have our basic animation done with the walls and the camera, let's come to the end and just type in the text that we want. So I'm just going to type in Creative Cow presents ... Grab the selection tool and make it a 3D layer. Hit P so you can see it, and let's just position this to somewhere a little bit closer to the camera, wherever you think it looks good. Right around 200 pixels, I think, is fine. And that looks good for now. Let's position it a little bit lower, and we'll set this final keyframe a little bit after 6 seconds. That's where the text is going to be, and then so the text will stop there, and the camera will keep moving a little bit afterwards, and the text will stay there. So let's go to the beginning now, and we'll have the text here start moving around right around 2 seconds or so, a little bit before 2 seconds, and just move the position in Z space quite a bit, and you can hold down Shift to make it move more quickly, and have this be whatever size you want. That looks pretty good right there. So actually, let's push it a little bit farther back. So there, what happens, the text is going to fly through, and we'll rotate it, don't worry. So it's not just going to cut through the walls like that. Text flies through, and there we have our basic text animation. So now at about 1.5 seconds, hit R, actually Shift R, so you can see both position and rotation. And for the Y rotation, if we rotate that, you can see which direction it rotates in, which is what we want. Set a keyframe for the Y rotation, and then come ahead to about 3.5 seconds, right before a little bit before it gets through this first hole, and rotate this not completely 90 degrees, because then it totally disappears, but like 87 degrees. That way we can still see the text as it flies through the first hole. And it's going to fly through there. And then again at about 5.5 seconds, let's set another rotation keyframe. And then when the animation is almost done, have the rotation go back to 0 so we can read the text again. So now you can see basically that the text, it starts here, rotates into this, goes through the holes, and unrotates at the end to reveal the final title, which will change in a second. So with these keyframes selected, let's ease them all. And again, what I'm going to do is just hit position and go into the graph editor, and I just want to smooth them out a little bit, just a little bit, so the rotation goes in a little bit more smoothly. and comes out a little bit more smoothly as well. That's the position. Let's do the same thing with rotation. This can actually start rotating if you want it a little bit sooner, and then just pull the handle out, again holding down shift so we don't actually change the angle of rotation. And do the same thing here so it's not so abrupt when it actually starts rotating and finishes rotating. And maybe move this keyframe over a little bit and then pull the handle out to make it last a little bit longer. If we hit play, you can see we have some pretty smooth motion into it and out of it, it should be. And you can play with that. It might be a little bit quick here, a little bit goofy looking, but you can play with that until you getting it to look how you want it to look like. Okay, at this point, what I'm going to do is make the text look a little better. So with it selected, I'll go to Effect, Stylize, Glow, and I'm going to bring the glow threshold up to around 80%. Bring the intensity up quite a bit, around 3 something, and then the radius to somewhere around 50, 60, something like that. And that looks pretty good. And that way we can actually see it glowing through the tunnel, which is kind of a neat look. Okay, at this point, one thing we can do is turn on the depth of field for the camera. So let's just organize these things a little bit and close up that layer and come into the camera options, close up transform camera options, and turn depth of field on. And what we need to do is link the depth of field to the text. So what's in focus is always the text and nothing else. So the way we do this is by, if you close the graph editor, hold down Alt and click on the stopwatch for focus distance. Take the pick whip and move it down to the Z position value for the position of the text. Put an end bracket after that and come to the beginning and put an open bracket. Come back to the end, hit a minus sign, open bracket, pick whip, and go up to the Z position value for the camera, and then end bracket. And then when you go out of that, what happens, if we just make it extreme, so let's open the aperture way up so we can really see what's happening, is that the camera is only focusing on the anchor point of our text. And obviously this is very extreme. So if we move it down to a normal value like 40, the text is what stays in focus the whole time. So basically what we did with this expression is said the value for the distance of focus, we're going to take that from the position of the text minus the position of the camera. And the reason we have to do that is because the text and the camera are flying through space at different rates and are in different places at the same time. So we have to involve both variables when we're trying to define the focus distance. And if you go through, you can see that it does work, and the only thing that's in focus is the text all the time, the anchor point of the text. And you can move the anchor point around or adjust the aperture level and blur level until you get a look that you like. Another thing that we can do is with everything, with each layer, turn on the motion blur. And then, so like if we go up to a hole here, you can see this better. So right down here, if we turn motion blur on for the comp, it adds a nice amount of blur, which adds a little bit of realism and makes it look a little bit cooler. So one of the last things we need to do is close up the hole after the text has gone through it. So if we change our active camera view to the top, we want to wait until the text layer has passed past the wall 1. So here's wall 1, and here's our text layer. So let's just scrub right until after it's come through the wall, and then, so right after it's come through the wall, and then for wall, hit M, so we can see everything. Let's go back to our active camera. Zoom in a little bit so we can see what's going on with the mask. Zoom out a little bit. And then, so right here, set a stopwatch for mask expansion. And come forward, maybe a second later. And just bring the mask expansion down until the hole is completely closed up. So right around there should do the trick. So hit J to go to the previous keyframe. And go back to this composition and set a keyframe for scale. Then hit K over here to go to the next visible keyframe. And just bring the scale down to 0. So what happens is that after the text comes out of the hole, the hole closes up behind it. And it's going kind of slow right now. So the text comes out of the hole and then the hole closes up behind it. So the last thing we need to do, sorry I said that would be the last thing, but the one more thing is actually change our title. So let's come to the end so we can see it. Close up this wall layer. Duplicate the title and turn off the bottom layer. And type whatever you want for this new layer. We'll say a new tutorial. Something like that. Come to sometime when the camera is in here. Let's turn off depth of field right now to make it go a little bit quicker. Sometime when the camera is passing through the tunnel, let's transition this. So with the new tutorial layer selected, hold down Alt and hit the open bracket to just stop it right there. And then select both layers and hit T to reveal the opacity options. Set a keyframe here. Go a little bit later and set another keyframe. And what we want to do is fade out the old layer and fade in the new layer seamlessly. So at this point, we can actually hold on Alt and close bracket to just end that second layer. And at this point, the second layer's value needs to be at 0. And if we just turn it on, we can see this. So it's there, and then it fades out as this new layer fades in. And at the opening, this layer's value needs to be at 0. So now they fade out seamlessly, and technically there might be a slight reduction in the glow, but it's fine because it's so moving so fast as it goes through the hole. And so we start off with Creative Cow Presents, and then through the tunnel it transitions into a new tutorial. So let's go back into our camera options, turn on depth of field, turn on motion blur for the comp, and let's preview our animation. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. One thing I recommend you do is go to my blog, which I don't update anymore, but if you go to it and read one of the last few posts called Philosophy of Tutorials, the point of this is just to show you some tips. You learned a little bit about expressions, camera work, animating text, and basic things in After Effects. So it's the techniques that count and not so much the actual effect that we created today. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. My name is Grant Swanson for CreativeCow.net.